Good afternoon. Today's speech is called The Power of Rhetoric. The ancient Egypt and Mesopotamian cultures are among the earliest known ancient cultures in the world. Mesopotamia, or the land between rivers, as known by most historians, can be described as the mother of modern civilization. The humblest beginnings of the modern-day civilization were witnessed here. The ancient Egypt culture has a long history of cultural achievements. The culture particularly boasts one of the finest and unsurpassed forms of kinship, artistic expression, and administrative skills. The two ancient cultures shared several similarities or common practices and differences while maintaining their unique entities. One of the most significant similarities that Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt cultures shared was the concept of abandoning their nomadic lifestyle. Before the beginning of civilization, the two cultures were nomads who moved from one place to another in search of water and pastures. Their livelihoods revolved around animals. For the first time in history, human beings were seen to settle down in one place and do farming instead of moving from one place to another every now and then. The two cultures emerged as the major frontiers of civilization between 3,500 and 3000 BCE. With their efforts, the discovery of the wheel, beer, writing, and calendar were witnessed. Another similarity is seen in the way the cultures stored their food after harvesting. The Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt cultures did not have convenience or well-established stores where they could keep their food after collection from farms. Both cultures instead adopted farm-to-table techniques, where basically food can be taken from the farms for consumption. In addition, both cultures settled and lived along river valleys, which were areas marked by rivers flowing through it and were flat. The areas were particularly good for farming, as fertile soils could be deposited into their farms by flooding rivers, which were seen to do so yearly. For instance, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers formed what historians call the Fertile Crescent while running through Mesopotamia. On the other hand, the ancient Egypt culture was dependent on the Nile, which ran through it and favored their farming. Religion can also be used as a marker of similarity between Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt cultures. Before the emergence of modern science and technology, religion was used to explain the events of every day. In this case, the two cultures were polytheistic in nature, which meant that they believed and worshiped in many goddesses and gods based on nature. For instance, both cultures had the gods of the earth, sun, fresh water, sky, as well as gods that were set aside for the underworld and human emotions. According to the practices of the two cultures, they valued healthy relationships with the gods, as this would ensure they received best harvests, meaning they would get the best chances of surviving. Moreover, the ancient Mesopotamia and Egyptian cultures share similarities in their social structures. The two cultures had similar or common ways of organizing their society. Their social structure can be viewed in terms of pyramids, whereby the top class was made of the ruling class and the lower class was made of slaves. However, it is important to note that during this time, slavery was not based on race, but rather those children who were sold into slavery and prisoners of war. The other classes comprised of lower class, which had farmers, musicians, merchants, and brewers. The middle class comprised of wealthier architects, merchants, and scribes. The upper class was mostly comprised of the nobles and clergy. Several differences existed between the ancient Mesopotamia and Egyptian cultures. The first can be seen through analysis of the geographic of the two areas where the two groups settled. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers were seen to flood irregularly, especially in the spring without warning, which led to the deaths and damage to their properties. On the other hand, the Egypt's river Nile flooding was predictable and only occurred once a year, especially during summer. Another difference existed in the religious perspectives of the two cultures. Since Mesopotamians experienced a rough time caused by the flooding, they were often pessimistic about their gods being unpredictable and believed that after death there was no land of return. On the other hand, the ancient Egyptians had an easy time since their predictions were accurate and therefore were more positive regarding their gods. They believed in continuation of life after death, which brought about the building of pyramids as large tombs stocked with jewelry, tools, food, and even servants. The similarities exhibited by the ancient Egyptians and Mesopotamian cultures can be derived from the fact that the two cultures have the same goal of abandoning their past way of life and accepting a new one. From my point of view, the lands outside two religions, the two regions where the rivers do not flow through, are often dry for most parts of the year. Therefore, this means that the climate may not have favored pastoralists or hunters and gatherers, and hence the need to establish a more stable source of food. The Nile, Euphrates, and the Tigris provided a perfect place to settle down and do farming, which was more stable and reliable source of food as they could farm throughout the year. The silt deposited along the riverbanks of the three rivers was more than perfect soil for doing agriculture. In addition, the similarities in their way of settlement along the rivers can be explained as the way of looking for a better and faster means of traveling than land could offer. During the ancient times, transport on land was mainly done by animals, which were not as efficient as water. The need to be near a faster means of transport could explain why the ancient Egyptians and the Mesopotamians decided to establish their lives along the rivers. The other reason for settling along the riverbanks was to offer protection against their enemies. Before people from the two cultures decided to settle along the rivers, they lived on land which was prone to attacks by their enemies from all sides. However, settling along the rivers with marshy deltas made invasion by their enemies a difficult task. The peace that followed along them to flourish, leading to the establishment of cities like Thebes in ancient Egypt, as well as Uruk and Ur in Mesopotamia. Moreover, the need to explain various occurrences and events that were happening to their lives led to the adoption of the polytheistic type of religion. The phenomena occurring in their lives could find explanation in more than one source, and hence the need to adopt many gods and goddesses to explain the occurrences. Most of the gods were attributed to things found in nature, such as the sun, which they had no control of, because the two cultures could not explain some of the occurrences in their own knowledge and understanding. They attributed it to powerful things found in nature that they did not exercise direct control over them. The variation in flooding can be attributed to primarily the geographical nature of the areas where the ancient Egyptians and Mesopotamians settled. The land between the two rivers might be sloppy and more prone to floods, as opposed to the riverbanks of the River Nile. The long course of River Nile also means that the waters could have reduced velocity upon reaching the Egyptians' plains and thus making the Egyptians safer from floods. On the other hand, the origin of the river Euphrates and the Tigris are near the two lands, meaning they were more prone to overflowing rivers. In addition, the desire to explain the causes of the occurrences around the two places where the people resided brought about the differences in their religions. As seen in this context, the Egyptian gods were more predictable, and thus they could place more faith in them as opposed to the unpredictable gods of Mesopotamia. About this, one can say that predictability of phenomena occurring around their lives shaped their religion as well as a way of explaining the happenings. The ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamian cultures were among the earliest forms of civilization. Through the civilization of the two cultures, most of the technologies we rely on today were invented. The modern societies continue to use the inventions made during early civilization by the two cultures, such as the calendar, wheel, beer, and invention of writing. Mesopotamians used cuneiform to help in the preservation of records, while the Egyptians used hieroglyphics to explain and expression their concepts and ideals. The Egyptians had efficient ways of performing division and multiplication, which impacted heavily on modern mathematics and accounting. In conclusion, the ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamian cultures thrived owing to their location along the rivers that went through their lands. Human beings of these ancient cultures settled along the valleys of the rivers to benefit from the fertile silt deposited along the river banks that was important for agriculture. Their settlement brought about the beginning of modern day civilization and ended a pastoralist way of life. However, there were several differences that existed based on the religious, political, and cultural differences that led to the emergence of human communities. Thank you.